So, Kat, I am so excited to be talking with you because you're one of the most interesting, incredible people that I know, and your book is amazing. So, for those of you who don't have the book, this is what it is. No one talks about this stuff, and it's a collection of 22 different writers who shared their stories about almost parenthood. So, if you aren't familiar with Kat, she is based in London and is a journalist. Kat's been featured in The Times and Stylist. She does reviews for The Telegraph, opinion pieces for The Independent and The Guardian. I love seeing your articles pop up because I know you do post on or you write on a lot of topics, but you have covered some like topics related to infertility and childlessness and now ADHD, which I got diagnosed with I guess it's been about 2 years now, and have your other book, It's Not a Bloody Trend, Understanding Life as an ADHD Adult. So excited to have both of those books from you because they are both relevant to my life. So thank you for putting those out into the world.
Thank you, Katie. And again, and also hello to everybody, including the person from Guildford. I spent a lot of time in Guildford as a teenager, sort of swanning around music shops, wishing I was not a teenager. But I think just a massive round of applause and big hug to Katie for everything that you do. And even though we're sort of like, you're interviewing me and I'm very grateful to be in a webinar with you now, you have been like a one-on-one pal and peer mentor and friend over the last few years since I discovered particularly the Instagram childless communities. And I interviewed you and Jodie Day and others for a piece in the Telegraph around childless communities on Instagram a few years ago, and was just so bloody grateful that you would. And thinking about the pieces that I write about infertility and so on, and ADHD, and I mean pretty much any other problem or other thing that comes up for me particularly, I think a lot of what I do is about trying to show all of the different facets of it. So
Yeah,
it's not just white female celebrity staring sadly out to sea and then there's a happy ending because there must be a happy ending to every story. It's sort of
right.
yeah, totally. It's showing, I don't know, picking up a concept and sort of turning it around so we see the back and the sides and the front of it as well, if that isn't
Yeah.
too tortuous a comparison. But everything that you've done through not just the communities that you've put together and the day talks and everything, but also just I see a kindred spirit in you, to see that Ellen Montgomery phrase, just basically women who won't shut up about wanting to be accepted and shown in all of our colours rather than just whatever a newspaper wants to paint us as, which is very boring.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that feels very generous of you. So thank you. I appreciate that and was absolutely thrilled that you asked me to be interviewed for your article. I was like dancing around my house and like freaking out, and you didn't see that because I showed up composed and acting like nonchalant about it. But oh my gosh, it was very cool to be a part of that piece. And I think that I see that in your writing. You know, you really do such a great job of giving representation to things that are kind of funneled into one perspective. When you look like if you look at how the media portrays it or what you see in TV or books or movies or whatever. It is all kind of giving you this one view of what that looks like, and it doesn't represent most of our stories. And so I really appreciate all the work that you do to add complexity to the conversation and in a good way, like add depth and representation for stories that are not just that like the happy ending is a baby. Like even when you said like, it doesn't all end with a happy ending, but also like I think exploring happy endings can look different ways too. Like so it's not even that we don't get a happy ending, it's just that we don't get a baby. So yeah.
Completely that. And I think one of the lovely things about exploring that and exploring the portrayal of women without children, to sort of use a very unmedia friendly phrase, because my God, any time that there is a survey about women without children in UK media, they're always depicted as childless. And it's like, mate, unless you literally went around and surveyed every woman under 30 for this, they're just women without children.
Yeah.
But like we've also seen with that ridiculous JD Vance clip that popped up a few weeks ago and has mercifully, sorry to any Trump supporters, but has mercifully damaged their approval rating. All that stuff about childless cat women, it's all stemming back to concepts about witches and about men and women, not just women, who were different or were healers or, you know, were unmarried, didn't have kids, and therefore didn't fit into a sort of clearly identified box. And
Yeah.
society loves a box, because without wanting to sound like I've just taken my tinfoil hat out of a box and put it on my head, that's how it controls people. But the joy of being a person in the world and having, you know, realistically, probably one time round to be able to do this is we hopefully get to do our own research and speak to lots of different people, learn from past generations, and see what we do and do not want to take on in our lives.
Yeah. Well, that's beautifully said. And the comments from JD Vance, I think that the thing that has really like warmed my heart about the reaction to it was just seeing how big it was. And anytime I was looking on, you know, like an article about it, there would inevitably be someone who kind of doubled down on what he said in the comment section. And then, you know, there'd be like 100 or 200 responses to that person's comment calling them out on it. And I just felt like the support for childless people was so much bigger than his comments was the feeling I got from it. And I really do think that his perspective, while we do, I mean, I think that there are some negative like stereotypes or stigma attached to not having kids, but I do think the perspectives are changing so much, and the extreme version of how he put that, I don't think most people agree with that. And you're right, it's coming out in the polling, and it's been, for me, it's been really nice to see even like so many parents jumping in and giving support. So
This
um
is it. This is the, sorry, just to expand on that briefly, I think we are in a brilliant time now, which will only get, you know, bigger and better as we get older, where people have met and spoke to enough people who have either, for example, gone through horrible experiences with infertility of their own, or just, you know, didn't meet a partner that they clicked with, and so for whatever reason, children, family didn't happen for them. And also, it was so lovely as well seeing not just Kamala Harris's stepchildren, who are legends of social media in their own right. I don't follow them because I just never get anything done staring at these little Gen Z icons, but also seeing her husband Doug's first wife also stepping into the ring and going, um, this woman is brilliant and we all work together in our family. And then Tim Waltz as well, the new her VP running mate, coming out and being just very matter of fact and wonderful about the fact that in order to have his children, IVF was a huge part of their story.
yeah.
And yes, yes, that can sort of pay into the myth that, you know, if you have IVF, then you're guaranteed a baby, which, my God, when I was doing it, I absolutely believed. I was so naive about it. I'm not a scientist. Um, but even so, just the idea that of somebody in politics being that open and that candid and that
Yeah.
authentic in a way that didn't feel like it had been run through umpteen, you know, groups beforehand to test the
Mhm.
temperature of something. They've just gone, you're weird. We had IVF. She's brilliant. What are you going to do? And I absolutely love that energy. And I think we've seen a little bit of that in the UK in this last week, because unfortunately, whenever it gets incredibly hot, that's when lots of people that like drinking very bad lager like to come out on the streets and use literally anything as an excuse for a riot. And we've had lots of that on the back of an absolutely appalling murder of three
Yeah.
children at a dance class in a place that should be safe. But what was so wonderful about the backlash to that was seeing how silently, in a very thin-lipped community way, people came back onto the streets, helped to fix back up brick walls, buildings, a lot of religious buildings, libraries as well, just get those
Yeah.
fixed, and then take to the streets themselves in anti riot demonstrations, which again were all very polite. There were lots of Nans against Nazis signs, which for the Americans among
Love
you,
that.
Nan is a very colloquial term for grandma, grandmother, and just lots of people all coming together to go, look, just because we're not super vocal about it, we will be here, we will show up, and we will not accept this.
Yeah.
And after the amount of, I mean, the UK has had a horrendous time of it for the last few years anyway, as we always get whenever a party is in power for too long, but particularly violent and lots of dog whistle politics against
Yeah.
trans people particularly, and literally anybody who doesn't appear to be like a white English born person. But it is wonderful sort of seeing these little shards of hope shining through the prism again. And similarly, my God, in the US as well, we need those. And those bits of hope comes from community, and it
Yeah.
comes from people stepping up and stepping forward. And that's something that expands all the way along the spectrum of conversation. And as you said, particularly and wonderfully with parents, with allies, and with like our friends, really, of anybody who doesn't have kids, just putting their hand up. Like the example I always think of is that children's story, The Emperor's New Clothes. And
Hmm.
this time it's the little, we're all basically being the little boy going, you're naked and this is nonsense and we're not going to
Yeah.
take that.
Yeah. Well, gosh, okay, so my last job was I spent a decade working in like the political realm. So that part of me just wants to like stay with you on this topic for the next hour. I feel like we need a second one of these that's just like a politics social issue shit talking session, and because I could
Bit
definitely go
talking is the
down
best.
some different areas with you on
Yeah.
this. Very, yeah, but I'm glad that you brought those things up because I think they're all connected in the
Yes.
way that are like social issues are not in a bubble. Like we all hold multiple identities, and there are intersections between different levels of oppression and what people are experiencing. And while I would say that, the stigma and stereotypes that childless people face are not to the extreme level of some of these other groups that are facing really extreme oppression, like trans people. And, you see this rise in racism and the alt-right and white supremacy just really feeling emboldened to kind of show up right now. Um, but I think it's important related to childlessness too, because all of those people, there's also going to be a segment that's childless, and they need to have their stories represented in the other parts of their lives that are being impacted too. So um, in my mind, like everything is connected. Like you can't have these conversations in silos because they're not always individual, and we live in the world too, like where there's just so much going on, and there's so much that like needs our attention. And yeah, anyway, I'm trying not to go too far down the political hole because I will stay there for the whole hour and then we won't hear anything about your book. But
That's okay. As it says, it is all connected. And a huge part of why I do any kind of talking around these issues, bearing in mind that my background is I'm literally an arts journalist. I mostly write about radio and telly and have a lovely semi-bitchy time doing so, and that's fab, and books as well. But my life experience as a very privileged white middle class woman is also intersected by being one who was 6'1" by the time I was 13. I got moved up a year at school when I was 7 because my probably quite insane London suburb doctors in the 80s were like, well, we can either give her growth hormones to stop her growing, or you can move her up a year at school because she knows her 7 times table. And then also like being ginger, being redhead, which mercifully just doesn't seem to be an issue in the States, but in the UK, and particularly in the 90s, was one of those really pointless playground bullying tropes that was just
Mhm.
like just that kids would just sort of really go for you for. And then something again I only discovered 4 years ago was that I had ADHD. I mean, I had loads of symptoms and other medical fun bits going on over the years, but that was something that I didn't know was happening when I was at school. But I always had that feeling of being very different, and not in a, oh, I'm different and one day I'm going to go on X Factor or something like that. It was just, I feel different to these people and I don't know why. So I
Yeah.
think a big ingredient in me feeling comfortable now, and I hasten to add, whenever I do talk about my own experience, it is just that. And I don't bring my husband, my friends, my family into it, because those are their stories.
Hmm.
So it's really just about me. But I feel comfortable doing that. I think probably because I've been bullied for so long.
Yeah.
I didn't understand mental health. Growing up in the UK in the 90s, with very little education about society due to this thing called Section 28, which prohibited the advertising or influencing of anything to do with being gay, lesbian, bi, or whatever on children. We weren't taught about that. So I was a very, very ignorant child and teenager, and made a lot of mistakes through thoughtlessness and misunderstanding, which I'm very conscious of now. But all of those have sort of added together to make me like perfectly happy to chat about all of this stuff, because I think it's really important. I haven't, obviously, as so many of us do, been felt comfortable often of talking to people whilst I'm in the grips of extreme pain or when something is going through it. But I find certainly writing about it, talking about it as well, really interesting and helpful and useful ways for processing not just how I feel about all of this random stuff that's going on with me, plus, can't have kids, we don't know why, unexplained infertility, but then also using that lens to really looking at how other areas of womanhood particularly are being essentially sometimes hijacked by, to use another tin hat phrase, but bad faith actors, particularly on
Hmm.
social media. An absolutely classic example of that last week, with a boxer, Iman Khalif, who a
Hmm.
lot of very big Twitter accounts were like, she's a man. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, A, she's not a man, and B, you shouting that she's a man is just going to really, really upset things, particularly as you've got literally no proof at all apart from whatever insane thoughts are rummaging around your head. Anyway,
Yeah.
she launched a lawsuit against this on Friday and Saturday. So really
Oh, I
looking
didn't
forward
know
to
that part. I didn't
see
hear
how
that
that turns
update.
out. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But it is that thing, whenever we start looking at particular ways of what a woman is, and bearing in mind these are boxers at the Olympics, they're not like tiddlywinks players. I mean, I could go to boxing at the Olympics and just basically be on the floor within like 10 seconds weeping, partly because I'm horrendously unfit and have no upper arm strength at all. I'm like a T-Rex. But again, I'm very tall, I have a deep voice, I have my dad's jawline, I'm infertile. When we start going on to the tick box of what makes a woman, usually,
Yeah.
oh, and then she's got children and she's really good at making cakes or something. It's getting back to that control aspect again. And the whole
Yeah.
point of feminism was to idealistically be able to let people get on with who they want to be and live their lives accordingly.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you said. I think that like I said, all of these issues are interconnected and intersectional, and I love that you speak out about them and use your platform for that. And I think that's really important. So um yeah, I'm with you on all of it, Kat. I think it's amazing. Um okay, let's talk about your book. So your book, no one talks about this stuff. What inspired you to create this specifically? Because I know you have personal experience, your own personal experience with being childless. So what was it about an anthology and bringing like this collection together that had you go that route versus like just writing about your own experience or having it be more like a nonfiction kind of?
I've never felt more lonely in my life, to be
Yeah.
blunt. Um, my husband and I got married in 2015. I then immediately got made redundant for a third time because working in journalism is a poison chalice. I wish I was financially astute so I could have become an accountant or something. And we started trying to have kids in that, and then it just wasn't sort of working. And then it sort of got into that awful grind that a lot of you watching might recognize about sex just not being romantic or, really even fun at all. And it just being a diary exploration in which you have, 2 weeks of anxious waiting and then, probably misery and this awful bubble of hope that keeps building up, going, maybe this time, maybe this time, maybe this time. Honestly, it felt like I was addicted to something, that
Mhm.
hope, that feeling. And anyway, so we went on to go and have 2 rounds of IVF, and all of the tests that we'd had said, both of you are absolutely fine. This is great. Even though you're, I don't know, reasonably old. I think I was 36 when we started having the IVF. All of our experts were like, oh, I wouldn't be worried unless you were 46, that sort of thing. But it just didn't work. Like none of my eggs matured enough to fertilize. And I didn't find anything about this online. It just felt very isolating because I couldn't find anybody who got that.
Yeah.
And then also because I was initially having like free IVF through our health service, but it turned out fairly quickly that the 3 cycles that I thought we were going to have were actually one, because in order to have 3 cycles, you needed to have eggs and embryos, and we obviously had none of them. So um, we were very fortunate in being able to use an inheritance from my grandma to put towards like a second cycle, which unfortunately then had exactly the same results.
Yeah.
And something that we did both find really comforting for a while, and not in a toxic positivity way, was the idea that even though this was very sad for us now, maybe in 20, 50 years' time, doctors would be able to use whatever they might have learnt from us to ensure that like another person or another couple didn't have to go through that. And so that was
Yeah.
quite inspiring, even though the doctor who told us this, somebody we'd never met before, was an absolute asshat, and he did not get any of the special chocolates that we'd bought for the various staff members. Um, but shortly after that, I gave up drinking alcohol, which was a decision that I'd been sort of circling around for about 10 years, but had never done because, to my mind, I never drank sitting on a park bench. I didn't have a red nose. I didn't drink in
Yeah.
the morning. I didn't. But it didn't make up for the fact that I felt quite quickly running out of control whenever I drank. And I would be really surprised by some of the things that happened. Not necessarily bad things, not necessarily the worst things, but often enough that it just wasn't a good plan for me to continue. And I started going to support groups. And a phrase that I heard really early on was advice to listen to the similarities and not the differences in people's stories. And that thread is something that I've subsequently drawn both through this anthology, in which there are parents, there are people of different ages, class, gender, sex, race, identity, what actually happens in their stories.
Mhm.
But I really found that just listening to almost like the thrum of emotion and to them talking about what was going on in their heads, it was
Yeah.
like whatever the story was, I was like, oh my God, that's me. Even if it was literally somebody who had the polar opposite of my experience. And the following year, which was March 2020, we had a consultation with another IVF clinic about potentially going into what I always think of as all you can eat IVF, where you just keep going and going and going until you either have a child or get a refund for the vast sums of money that you've spent. And the doctor there was just like, you could maybe do one more cycle, but we just wouldn't advise that for you. And so
Yeah.
we got this news in lockdown. So obviously we couldn't go and see our pals. It was just the two of us. We went for our sort of hours tragic March walk in this awful grey, blur, Londony weather. And I just felt so, so sad that I wished that I could disappear.
Mhm.
And adoption, which was something that I'd been reading about, looking up on, researching through loads of podcasts for a while, my brain just didn't feel quite in that area to be able to concentrate on that. And then a
Yeah.
few months later, through which is a different story, I ended up with my ADHD diagnosis and understood a bit more why I was feeling like that. But that summer, whilst I was coming to terms with yet more infertility stuff, plus also having lost all my work because, lockdown, doing a lot of very negligible DIY projects in the house instead, thank you, YouTube. A friend got in contact, a former colleague who I had met up with once before from this publishing house, Unbound, which does crowdfunded books to basically make sure that niche stories can get out into the public. And we sort of worked through an idea of a book. She was like, I'd love you to write something about parenting. And I was like, well, one flaw is, and so we ended up sort of thrashing out the idea for an anthology of 15 stories, ideally to bring, it was originally, it was just going to be 15 women. And then we sort of expanded on this, and other people in my life sort of fed in and were like, oh, what about maybe like the partner's point of view and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then we were able to have another 7 stories. So I opened this up to public submissions to make sure that we could include as much as possible. But it was just, I was very mindful of that wonderful thing that Jodie Day said in Living the Life Unexpected, which was an absolute Bible for me when I was, and I still go back to, about coming to terms with not having children. And she was like, you know, you don't have to become Mother Teresa just because
Yeah.
you're not a parent. And
Mm-hmm.
this is not my Mother Teresa moment. This is, I think, as a journalist, somebody who can edit and organize stuff, was just like, oh, I want to get something together. What can it be? And
Yeah.
by crowdfunding it, which was a mammoth task, and I think I could
Yeah.
only have done because I was possibly slightly insane, but also really driven by it and really enthused to bring people to it. But the idea that there are like 700 plus names in the back of this book who pledged to this book and helped to make it, so that somebody who is really in the weeds of grief and feeling really lost can find that support group in a book and listen to their story, their feelings, their experience coming out of the mouth of somebody with a completely different story to theirs.
Yeah.
That's why I had to make this book. I'm so grateful to you and to everybody else that helped to make it a possibility.
Well, I mean, it's such a cool way to do it, right? It's like it really feels community oriented. Like I love community stuff, and yeah, the crowdsourcing piece, such a great way to do it. And I yeah, I love how diverse the representation is in your book of kind of whose stories are being told. And I'm curious how you made the decisions about who to include. Like, were there certain experiences that knew you wanted to capture, or like, because I think you probably got a ton of submissions, so it's interesting to hear like kind of how you sorted that out. And I will just say, I was surprised that the first story that I got into was from a parent, because when I saw the title about almost parenthood, so I do just want to ask,
Yeah.
um, kind of what was your decision process about including stories from some parents as well?
So when we were talking earlier about that intersectionality, there are loads of stories from people who are childless in here, as well as people who are childless, but also perhaps evolving, morphing, if you like, into child-free, and
Yeah.
others who, for reasons of childhood trauma, are currently just, no, they're childless as a result of that, and their life might evolve. Um, I know quite a few people who are parents and who have lost children along the way to that. And I think maybe if we were having this conversation 10, 15 years ago, I would have been like, yeah, I don't want parents in my book. They've got their kids. What do they know? But I now know that, because I mean, I've never been pregnant, like ever. I
Mhm.
don't know. I might have like, I don't know, Barbie's innards in there or something if I hadn't literally seen them on ultrasound. But I know from having spoken to so many different people, the absolutely agonizing loss is not something that mysteriously gets band-aided over because you go on to have a living child.
Mhm.
Um, I have a couple of friends at the moment, actually more than a couple, sadly, who are going through like recurrent miscarriage. They have a living child. There needs to be a better way of calling this. They already have a kid.
Yeah.
Um, a bit recurrent miscarriage is there. And that sort of having to make a decision about whether you carry on trying,
Mhm.
knowing that the next time, I mean, just as with anybody, I think this myth that like, oh, we just, have sex, get pregnant, fabulous. And
Right.
that's maybe the case for only, some people, certainly not for queer people. It was just really hard. But I think, again, it's coming back to that thing of listening to the similarities, not the differences. And when we were
Hmm.
trying to think of a way of calling it, it was almost parenthood. I mean, I still sometimes idly like see my children, not literally again, but that sort of gauze, that little timeline in which they were running around being appalling and committing childy crimes and that sort of things, and we were parents, and we might not have had our dog, we might not have randomly brought home our second cat, which we got the same year that all the IVF stuff was going on. I literally found her in a street at Christmas. What was I to do, Katie? It was a Christmas story come to life. um but that timeline might be real, and that still very much sits with me, and I still feel those unconscious pangs anytime that I do see somebody who is pregnant, because for me it's not necessarily seeing people's kids, it is that liminality, seeing them when they're pregnant, that possibility.
Yeah.
But also I just think Alice Jolly, who opens the book, I mean, bloody hell, she goes hard. That is, yes, okay, guys, she has living children, but the stuff that my God, the stuff that she's gone through to get there. I
Yeah.
mean, that essay that she writes is so unflinching on the terms of the pity that you can get from people. Alice is also probably about 15 years older than I, and I'm 41. So this is not quite another generation, but still just
Hmm.
sort of a little bit further up. And there isn't the community, the understanding that I've almost taken for granted when I've allowed myself to have it. That
Yeah.
just wasn't there. So she's written so amazingly on how you become, or you can become, the comparative. You can become the, oh no, well, look at them over there, ooh, that sort of thing. And she's like, I'm literally just here being a person trying to get through all of this. So she was just so fabulous. So that almost felt like a bulldozer essay for the
Yeah.
first one. But again, thinking about parents and everything in there, I ended up adding a trigger index at the back, which I do
Yes,
hope
I
that people
actually
will
refer people to that. It's so helpful
stuff.
because I think uh I did hear from a few people that said, well, I read the first one and was surprised it was a parent, and so I didn't know if I should read the rest of it. So I did let people know, look at the index, you can see like, which ones might be for you if you want to skip some. But if you're someone who read the first chapter and was like, well, maybe this isn't for me if it includes parents, I hope that Kat's explanation of why she included them maybe once is enough to have you give it a second chance and read the rest of the essays, because you're really missing out if
Oh,
the
also,
parenthood stories are triggering, and so
yeah. Well,
you're
this is
not
so
continue on. It's an amazing
no. I
collection.
mean, to be clear, like I have the trigger index here because I mean, I didn't know about most of these things when I started out putting the book together. Like, what is dysfunctional uterine bleeding? I now know. What is early permanence? I now know more. Again, I knew vaguely about the concept of ectopic pregnancy, but I mean, endometriosis, adenomyosis, these are conversations that have come out more lately, but it's not like they're conditions that have only mysteriously jumped into being recently. It's just our understanding of them has gone. But it is also so that people going through whatever at the moment can go through and just be like, yeah, no, probably not for me. So that's why, for example, we've got IVF successful as one of
Mm-hmm.
the topics that you can potentially avoid. Miscarriage, slavery as well is a big one, because a huge one for one of our contributors was about working through ancestral shame that
Yeah.
manifested in how she responded to her experience of infertility. There's all these sorts of things. I mean, I really wish that this book were completely perfect, but unfortunately it's not, because I edited it and I'm not, and I
I
had
think it
lots
is
of help,
perfect.
but
I mean,
still,
I think that it's a
yeah.
it's really hard um to try to create something that's going to be for everyone. And I think with you including so many different stories, some stories are going to resonate more with with certain people than others will. But like, if someone reads a story that doesn't quite resonate with them, it is going to resonate for someone else. So there is no such thing as like a perfect book that's going to resonate fully with everyone. I have no doubt that like the parent inclusion, I loved that first essay. It was beautiful, and the story was just, I mean, so heartbreaking, and the way it was written. So it's definitely not a critique. I think
Oh,
I
but it's
totally
allowed to
understand why
be.
you,
It's
yeah,
it's completely allowed to be, because you and I are childless women, and we're speaking about this to childless women. But I think, and again, this is possibly a, excuse me, well, I just crowdfunded £20,000. I'll put what I damn well like in this book. But I think it was just that thing that I was so, I'd always thought that being childless would mean that I would always be in a silo, and that I would never have friends with parents, friends who were parents.
yeah,
And I'd seen some of these silos as a child growing up,
hmm,
and seeing how people just drifted away from each other. And so
yeah,
this is probably a very clumsy, overly idyllic way of doing it. And I completely agree with Laurie in the comments there. I also really wish the trigger index were up at the front. And maybe for a future edition, we can just sort of cut and paste that around, because it's not perfect. But this is also, I suppose, the concept of this book is that when I was trying to find more stories, I felt so bizarrely resentful about very often having to either buy them on Kindle on Amazon, or do the 2020s equivalent of sending off a stamp dressed envelope somewhere to get some
yeah,
horrible, poorly printed thing in the post. I was like, no, I want this to be on bookshelves. I
yeah,
want this to be like up front in shops and that sort of thing. And I love that the feminist bookshop in Brighton has been really like a big supporter of this book. And I love the fact that actually that there are men writing in it as well, because
hmm,
it's again listening to those similarities, not the differences. And
yeah.
parents, and in fact, one of the parents writing in the book, Seetal Savler, had
I love
lots.
her.
She's epic. I mean,
Yeah.
again, talk about intersections. She's writing from a Southeast Asian cultural point of view as well, but also as an immigrant, I suppose, now moving from the UK to Berlin, but also having come very close to donor egg IVF after previous cycles, and
Hmm,
then had this a completely out of the blue miracle baby, like a
hmm,
natural conception. And so her entire essay is all about, for her, examining the myth of the happy ending, which is obviously very particular to her, but because of her years of campaigning as an
yeah,
IVF patient and more widely, examining the way that infertility is portrayed, examining the way that we allow certain stories to be portrayed. And
yep,
again, thinking about choices for the book, again, this is probably something, if I were more savvy, or if this wasn't such a personal project for me, like not having celebrities in it or people who'd already written books and that sort of stuff, because their stories are out there. And I'm
hmm,
very conscious about the fact that often it can feel as the only people that we know who've gone through infertility or loss or anything are celebrities, because they're, I don't know, something about their stardom makes it allowable, in very bunny ears, inverted commas,
hmm,
to be infertile in some way. But then also very often, candidly, because they have the financial resources to be able to pursue some of the other options, which can mean that they perhaps do go on to have children.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
I think also too, even within, if you want to look at like, the famous people or celebrities who talk about this, I've noticed that it's typically after they've been like specifically with infertility, after they've been through infertility and then had a baby is when they then get the front cover of the magazine of them with their baby saying, look what I had to go through to get this. I went through like IVF and here's my story. And then they share about the infertility after they have the baby. I don't see very many talk about it in the middle of it, where they're like, I'm currently going through IVF. I feel like most of the stories, and it is the framing, right? It's like once you have the miracle baby, then I don't know, then it's like front page newsworthy to talk about how hard it was to get there. And then that's
Yeah,
when
or
the
Hollywood.
infertility stories come out. And it's like, oh, okay, but what about, I think that's where like Jennifer Aniston was such a rare exception,
Legend.
uh, to talk about it, without getting the baby at the end.
Well, it was
So
also her
rare.
reclaiming her story.
Yeah.
And I mean, part of the reason that we have so much appetite for these, you know, and everything was bad, but it's okay now stories is because that's fundamentally the stories that make up Hollywood. We love
Yeah.
an underdog story. We love a happy ending because it's sort of heightened reality. Like our
Hmm.
real lives are not great big roller coasters with third act red velvet curtains and then nothing bad ever happened again, which
Yeah.
is the myth of the happy ending. But then also, this is also why I find the embracing childless hashtag that I think you came up with that, didn't you? Brilliant.
Yeah, me and my friend Tanya, because so many of the hashtags
Oh,
that get
yes,
used, like
lovely
if you look
Tanya.
up childless not by choice, like they get used in ways that they are not meant to be
Yeah.
used. So if you're someone looking at like hashtag childless, it's gonna be like parents who are like, I'm on like grandma's watching the kids and we've got a date night away from the
Oh
kids,
my God.
hashtag childless. And I'm like, wait, what? And then there's also so many like people who are currently in infertility, who will be posting about their infertility journeys in the middle of it, or for some reason, people who just had a baby after infertility and then for some reason wanted to celebrate their ultrasound picture or their newborn picture with hashtag childless. And I'm like,
Oh my God.
why? You
It's
know that
like
the
the
people looking this up are going to not be interested in this. So, yeah, embracing childless. My friend
yeah.
Tanya Hubbard and I came up with that idea because we just wanted something that wouldn't get co opted by other people and get used. It's specific enough that it won't get used by other people, but
It's specific
also,
enough, but it shows joy as well. And I
yeah.
think that's the other myth that we dispel is because historically and ancestrally, we might have been aware of people who were childless. And actually, I got reminded of In All Places, Pride and Prejudice the other day because Mr. and Mrs. Gardner, Lizzie Bennet's wonderful uncle and aunt, who take her to Pemberley for the wonderful moment in the lake in the BBC version, not in the lake in the book. Um, they don't have kids. Never any mention of kids. And given that there was pretty much no contraception back then, we can probably say that they were childless unless they had astute understanding of biology, which I highly doubt. But there have always been these figures there. It's just it was sort of
Yeah.
oh, we don't talk about why or anything. We don't want to interfere or we don't want to offer support or help them or anything whilst they might be going through something. But all
Hmm.
of these things are real. All of these things are happening. And again, one of the reasons that I ended up writing about infertility and particularly failed IVF, which just didn't seem to be a thing that was being examined even a few years ago, was because after our second cycle, I just sent a tweet out just saying, I've just discovered, our second cycle of IVF has failed for reasons we don't understand. I've never felt more sad or more alone, which my God is so true. And I can,
Yeah.
how you can just time travel back to that feeling. And I just
Oh,
said, I'd
yeah.
really appreciate any kind words that you have. And yeah, I got random advice about, oh, Princess Diana's acupuncturist and all that sort of, crook, whatever. But I also got the kindest, most steadfast messages from people either who'd had their own experiences of failed IVF, not having children, infertility, parents who were still, and I could read it in their messages, grey, even with their living children, at the
Hmm.
years of, literally pushing at the coal face to actually get there, because it scars you, all of it.
Yeah.
And another wonderful thing that Jodie Day, who obviously I mentioned so bloody much, I had to get her in the book. She does a wonderful dismantling of uh, not patriarchy, pronatalism, which is now a
Hmm.
word that in the UK we're seeing more even in mainstream press. But
Mm.
she had this lovely description about, it's not that the wound goes away. It's just that eventually it might just, the rest of you will grow around it. And it'll
Yeah.
almost become like, I don't know, one of the old 80s My Little Ponies that had jewels in their rumps. And it's
So
just sort of
cute.
there as part of you. And again, when I was getting people through public submission, I made it very clear you need to have worked through your story
Hmm.
before submitting it
Yeah.
because the mundanity of being edited, like oh, I'm just going to have to remove this detail and semicolon here. That's a lot for you to go through if it's not
Mhm.
something that you're not thrown into a trauma response through remembering. So I
Yeah.
needed to make sure to look after my writers as well as, looking after me potentially a bit as well. But
Yeah.
everybody got it. And we got about 200 submissions from that. And I was
Wow.
gutted that we couldn't obviously, you know, put them all in. And actually,
Yeah.
that might have been, if I'd had more confidence originally, I might have just been like, okay, well, let's just open it up entirely and just have the whole thing come through submission, which is actually something that a wonderful anthologist, Rebecca Pierre, has done for her book on care experienced
Mm.
individuals.
Hmm.
And I do sort of wish I'd thought of that back then. But again, these are 22 varied, honest, and non-traumatizing essays that really
Yeah.
ask questions about society more widely, as well as how do we move through these awful experiences, not just medically, but just examining ourselves. Like, how do we deal with those feelings that, well, what do I do now, if you like? What do I do for the rest of my life?
Hmm.
Um, and I'm just so proud of everybody who's written for this, and everybody who's supported this as well.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I love the representation in here because I think trying to collect my thoughts because you said so much that I just would love to dive into, but I think I shared the same reaction as you in terms of like when I realized that I wasn't going to be a parent and that it like hit me like, okay, this is actually a thing for sure. Um, oh, I never felt that alone. And I've always been an external processor where I like to just call my friends and family and call everyone I know and talk through what I'm going through. And it was the first time in my life that I got really withdrawn and went deep inside. Like I have never wanted to like spend a lot of time alone, but I found myself just wanting to be alone a lot and had so much going on internally that I was just trying to work through and process. And that's why I started originally my Instagram account and a blog that didn't make it very long because it turns out I don't like not getting the conversation and reaction that I get to have on Instagram. A blog felt very much like I'm putting it out and I don't know what's happening with it. I don't get to have a conversation. So, but yeah, that idea of just how lonely it is. And it's, it's kind of bonkers at this point. Cause if like 1 in 5 people never has kids, why do we feel so alone? Now, granted, like obviously, a lot of those people are child free by choice, but I think that representation piece and that's why I appreciated so much how much obviously went into the book in terms of finding people who had a really diverse range of experiences that they could talk about and to bring some of those stories to bring some of those out and have them in this collection because I think even when I started working with the childless community I was very focused on my own experience of having been through infertility and having tried IVF. And then I think it was when I started running like these peer support groups. I was doing just like monthly, let's meet up, we'll talk about a topic and we'll just do like peer support. And the feedback that I kept getting afterwards in the beginning and then also in the sessions was people just kept saying, I don't know if I belong here. And then it would be followed by because I I'm single, I never met someone to even try to have kids. So I don't know if this is a place for me. Or I don't know if I belong here because I went through infertility, but I decided to do no treatments. And everyone else seems like they did IVF, even though only 5% of people who experience infertility do IVF.
Yes.
95% don't. Now, granted, probably that's because a lot of them end up getting pregnant without needing intervention, but still, there's a lot of people who decide that they don't want to pursue interventions for a number of reasons. So, or I've even heard people say, um, I went through IVF, but I didn't adopt. So I don't know if or I didn't try to adopt, or, it's like everyone had these like, it's like the checkbox thing, right? Of like,
Yeah.
do I fit this criteria to be a part of to be a part of this, to be here in conversation, to, is my grief valid? You know, do I belong? And I started to just hear how, you know, Jody has that list of like, I think it's the 50 ways that people come to be childless. I can't
Yes,
remember the exact
amazing.
title, but I started seeing that as I got to meet people, and I was like, wow, my story is just this like there's people who share some similarities to my story or some of my experiences, but there's this whole world of experiences that are leading people to be childless that I had never even heard talked about. And that's because, I mean, probably because I wasn't like seeking them out, but also because the representation just isn't there. It's just not. And I don't, it's still very perplexing to me that this is 2024 and the versions that we have of what does it mean to be childless? What does that look like? There's just there's just such a small amount that you can find when you're going through that and looking for it. It's perplexing to me why it's still like that. I mean, I get it. I do understand like the reasons for it, but it just, I really wanted to change. And I think that your book, you know, I appreciate how much thought went into the diversity within the stories because I think that it's a beautiful example of being able to bring some of those stories out. And I try to do the same at my summits of,
Yeah.
you know, trying to have a really broad representation of what it means to be childless and reflecting different stories because um, I think everyone wants to see their story reflected somewhere. And if you're only seeing one version of childlessness, it can feel like even within the childless community, people are feeling alone or like they don't belong or they don't have the connection that they're looking for because they're only seeing one version of what that can look like.
Well, this was a huge part again of what inspired me to write about this and to do this book was because there were no support groups for me. And I remember getting a very sweet, very compassionate message from one group that I'd messaged, which was for people who'd lost children. And I was like, I don't know, am I allowed to join this? Because I've lost the children that I, you know, was going to have. And they came back and went, this, I'm so sorry, but this is literally for people who have lost children who've literally died. So I was
Mm.
like, okay, right, fine. And I just couldn't find anywhere to go because everywhere seemed to be about, there was nowhere for for like fertility with a big end, if you like. It was all
Yeah.
sort of, if you're still in that liminal middle bit, if you're going to
Mm-hmm.
keep trying and all that sort of stuff, there was nothing, there was no sort of end date for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've put in like a load of resources at the back of the book for four different support groups, sometimes related to identity, sometimes phone lines, online communities, charities, and that sort of thing, trying to analyze these. And also just in the books that I've included, lots of them are
Yeah.
novels as well, because we want to see ourselves like in novels. One of my favorite books of the last few years is Meg Mason's Sorrow and Bliss, which managed to put in sort of like mental health, potentially neurological problems and infertility and
Mm.
huge amounts of envy about her incredibly fertile sister. It's also one of the funniest books that I've ever read. So putting those in. My husband and I did eventually go to a wonderful service called Saying Goodbye, which was organised by Zoe Clark Coates's Mariposa Trust,
Mm.
which is a non-denominational service. It took place in a beautiful cathedral, so you've still got that awe, and there were loads of candles and everything. And it was a beautiful service in which it was explicitly said that this was a place for people to say goodbye to children, whether they'd been conceived or not. So it was
Mm.
really open to single people, to people who, like me, had just never been pregnant, the people who'd never conceived, but had
Yeah.
really, you know, conceived in their mind and in their hearts, which is, you know, quite agonizing actually when you're living, when you see that timeline splintering off, and then
Mm-hmm.
God, there are so many other things to be tackled. But also, as wonderful it was, we had a howl of laughter afterwards because it played that Snow Patrol track that was on the incredibly saccharine musical episode of Grey's Anatomy. Oh my God, I really had a hard time keeping it together. I did then cry buckets like during the service, and I found it very cathartic. And we went for a lovely dinner afterwards and everything. And it was just so nice to have somewhere to go. I think what is again so lovely is that these things are just coming in the more that we pay attention. And so, you know, hopefully soon there will be like more support groups that are relevant to people as people set them up.
Yeah.
And there isn't quite so much gatekeeping. But again, I think for me it was also because I found so much support and empathy from parents who'd had failed IVF, so often a horrifying number of miscarriages.
Yeah.
And then alongside the childless women that have come before me, whose books and work and podcasts I've so valued, like Jessica Hepburn, who went through 11 cycles of IVF before calling time, and so just so many other people speaking about it. Because I think the thing that I really needed to know was that I was going to be okay, not just as somebody in the world who didn't have kids. I didn't assume that like the Ghostbusters were going to come and throw me in a basement or something, but just that mentally and in my heart and in my soul and in my gut and just everywhere that I would be okay. And so this book, not just the people that I've met or spoken to or edited for it, but the people who've contacted me, who've supported it. And we have this lovely section at the back, like remembering our children. And that's not just children who they've lost. It's again, the possibility of children. That was
Yeah.
a huge thing for me as well. And I'm so grateful to people that, you know, that did pay tribute to the children that for whatever reason aren't with us now. And it's a, you know, it's a messy old beast and a beautiful, very grand typeface, but it's finding the people that need to read it. And what is wonderful is hearing from people quite randomly that X, Y, and Z person is going through it and they've bought them a copy and or sent them a copy or something, just so that they've got a hand to hold them whilst they're
Yeah.
going through it, and to know that in whatever flavour their grief is occurring, that they are seen and they are heard, and they are ultimately loved and understood.
Yeah. Well, I think you've done that very beautifully.
I'm just sort of typing in the chat as well, because there have been some really good comments that I also
Yeah, feel free to talk about those right now
yeah,
if you
please.
want, if there's something you want to just, instead of having to type.
That would be wonderful. This is a brilliant comment call from Chrissy. It says, I'm finding it hard being childless and totally single, having been so for the majority of my life. This area is very rarely touched upon. You can even share the grief of being childless with your partner. Before I came on the chat, I was having a snooze on the sofa listening to the audiobook of a brilliant women's fiction novel called Yinka, Where is Your Husband? By a British Nigerian novelist called Lizzie Damalola Blackburn. It's very funny, but it's also about a very like lifelong single woman whose younger sister has got married and is having a baby, whose mother and Nigerian aunties are very much like, you've got to get married, otherwise the world is going to fall apart. And about how, you know, how much trouble, understandably, she and lots of her contemporaries have at dealing with that. Because, you know, when the society, when people close to you are going, oh, it'll happen for you soon, or you need to get a move on because you're getting really old, it's the worst feel. It's just the worst feeling ever.
Yeah.
And this book deals with that so delicately, so hysterically funny, and it's very, very sharp as well. So I'll pop that in the comments as well, just because again, that visibility, that understanding is great. But also it's got a wonderful example through it of a different generation coming up with more empathy, more compassion, more understanding. Hurrah for that. But candidly, between us and the internet, you know, yes, I can share the grief of being childless with my partner. We're not on the same level about it at all. I wouldn't say that he compartmentalized it at all, but the different ways that we went through it, like the last few years of my life, I've been fucked up massively,
Yeah.
not just because lots of stuff happened at once, like giving up alcohol, ADHD diagnosis. I then had a hip replacement that got infected. It was a lot going on, but because I kept trying to go, you know, well, it's not that bad. You can't have kids. You're not a Victorian chimney sweep. Your leg hasn't fallen off, blah, blah, blah. you've still got most of your health, that sort of thing. And actually, I had to go away and have a really quiet moment on my own earlier this year where I acknowledged that far from dealing with all these feelings, what I'd sort of done was create like a mental and emotional rubbish dump and put a very thin layer of grass on top of it that I was convincing myself was a lovely hill that I was standing on. And so what I've been doing for the last few months, bearing in mind that my failed IVF was 2019, so I should be over this by now, is going, this is another layer of grief that I need to address openly and deal with
Mhm.
it and be able to acknowledge, because there is so much toxic positivity out there. But yeah, I can
Yeah.
totally assure you it's not like, I don't know, a pair of swans or something going, we are perfectly in sync and we have our feelings in the same way at the same time. But on the other hand, you are right. And I have an immense level of support from my partner that I'm incredibly grateful for, not least because I've been a total Looney Tune psychopath. I mean, this isn't earning me any money. And yet he's just like, you go for it, you do that. That's totally fine. So yeah, again, hugely grateful for that. And thank you for that mega comment. Another one, just quickly, Sarah, I'm childless because my parent does not want kids. So I have a partner, but they do not recognize the grief I've experienced. Woof, this is a massive one. And again, it's that, yes, you found somebody that you get on with and love so deeply on so many levels, but you know what you ultimately want doesn't necessarily overlap. And
Mhm.
again, personally, we've made a number of compromises to make sure that not necessarily that one of us is getting our way all the time, but it's a lot. And I do know a few people, and again, not to share their stories, but a reasonable number of people who do not have shared hopes and expectations for children. And all I can really just say, Sarah, is I'm so sorry. I really, really hear that. And you're not going mad. It's a very real thing. And I hope that whatever you're doing together separately to acknowledge and sit with those feelings that you do, because you don't want the rubbish dump under the thin layer of grass. It's not there. Um, Julie as well. I'm with you, Chrissy. I feel the same. And also, if a relationship is broken because of infertility, which is another form of disenfranchised grief, unacknowledged, so differently from being widowed, it can seem to be another level, another layer of failure. I mean, just all of these, exactly. It's just all of these different specific experiences, all of which are just like shattered mirrors of grief.
Mhm.
And I think the key thing is for each of us is finding somewhere that we can scream that grief into the world.
Yeah.
My God, I did a lot of therapy. I probably didn't do enough therapy because I was very privileged to be able to do therapy for the while that I did it, and I can't really afford to do it at the moment. But just finding somewhere, and that is again finding our people, finding our
Mhm.
tribe, the people in this chat, friends who don't have the same experience but understand grief in a way. I mean, very sadly, I'm at an age where my contemporaries, older and younger, are losing parents, siblings, you know, in some cases, children, um, and friends and family members. And again, all of these things just feel so isolating because you're just sort of looking at the world ostensibly carrying on without noticing the pain and loss that you're feeling. It's
Mhm.
just, yeah, it's absolutely, it's massive. It's a lot. And
Yeah.
all we can sort of hope for is to put together our own little toolkit of things that help us speak through grief. And for me, sharing how I feel in a
Mhm.
safe place and saying it out loud rather than just keeping it in my head is invaluable, because otherwise it just all bottles up and comes out as anxiety, depression, anger, just all of those. It's the rubbish dump again,
Yeah.
basically. And
Well,
then
I think
last,
that's
okay.
where, yeah, being able to, like you say, have a space that you can talk about it and share some of the parts of your story that are unique and find other people who share those that you can talk to. Like, so, in the Childless Collective online community that was previously Gateway Online Community, Gateway Women Online Community, we have subgroups, and that is really the purpose for those, is to have places where you can connect with people who might share parts of your experience. So we've got a group for step parents. We've got one for people who are single. We've got one for if you're childless after infertility. We've got one for if you're partnered. And, those are, I think it was really smart how Jody set that up, because it gives people those, we have our shared community space where we're all together, but then it gives people also some areas to kind of try to find those people who have similarities with their stories. And I think that's really important. Even sometimes with something like, we have a group for people um, who have nieces or nephews. And I've had people say, well, I don't know if I want to join that group because I don't just want to hear about how amazing it is to have nieces and nephews, because I um, have a really complicated relationship with my nieces and nephews. And so what I love about it though is that if you go in that group, you'll find celebration and joy that comes from being an aunt, or you'll also find people talking about the parts that can be really hard or the ways that it could trigger our grief. And you'll also hear people talking about, I wish that I had a close relationship with my nieces and nephews, and I don't due to these different factors. And I feel like, yeah, I'm seeing the comments of, and to me, I see this happen so much in the community where it feels like there's just so many people who don't feel seen. They don't feel like their story is reflected. They don't know how to connect with people who share parts of their story, and they just feel like, yeah, so alone in this. And even within the childless community, they're still feeling alone if they can't make those connections of people who share some of their story and what makes their story unique. And so, I mean, my hope is that as these conversations keep going, we start to see more representation, because I'll be honest, like even when I host my summits, I work really hard at trying to create a really like diverse representation there of reflecting a lot of different stories and reasons that people would be childless. It's really hard for me, not because those stories don't exist, but because there aren't a lot of people who are talking about it publicly and who have gotten to a point in their journey where they feel like ready to talk about it on that public of a level, right? Because like my summit has over 3 years, I had 8,000 attendees combined over 3 years of people who attended the summit. That's a lot of people to be hearing your story and to have like to put it out there in that public of a way. And I'm really hoping that as the years go on and the childless community builds, that more people who are feeling like, well, I'm not seeing my story reflected. I'm really hoping that we start to see some of those people sharing their stories more publicly, so that, and not for everyone, right? I don't think that it's everyone's
No, totally.
it's for a specific type of person though, that like wants to be sharing this publicly, it can take a little bit of a thick skin, which I actually don't have, but it can be kind of hard to like talk about it. So I understand um why there's not a huge why there's not a lot of representation right now, but I do hope that that changes as the community grows, that people start to feel empowered to start an Instagram account, start a blog, start a podcast, get your story out there, because you'll be the representation that you're wanting to see for someone else. And I'm just hoping that will grow, because I'm not for everyone. I don't reflect everyone's stories, but I'm in my own little corner, right? Of like, I'm just doing what I can. And then also trying to like find voices that I can amplify. But I do hope that that grows, because I think these comments really reflect just how underrepresented a lot of people feel.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
And I think it's very difficult when people almost don't know what they're looking for as well. And again, one of the reasons that I did that public submissions, which ended up getting some of the most powerful and some of my favorite essays in the book, but one of them is anonymous because the writer is writing about her experience of both infertility and being a step parent, and then also about pronatalism within the Jewish community, and particularly in her quite small Jewish community.
Mhm.
So there's so many intersections happening there. But then she was like, somebody will totally recognize me, so absolutely not putting my name on it, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But I'm just, again, so grateful for people that have submitted and who do want to sort of share their stories. And I think there's always something that feels oddly quite private about a book, in a way that Instagram or websites or social
Mhm.
media ironically feel less private, even though they might be quite ephemeral. And a book, you know, will be there for a long old time. You might not find what's in it unless you literally crack the covers and go on into it.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I,
just
I
really
was gonna say,
grateful.
I think that's why, because if no one is gonna read this book or find out that you contributed to it unless they are reading it, right? Seeking it out and reading it. Whereas, I mean, I just did a reel last week on Instagram that has, I think, 350,000 plays. And it's really scary to know that that many people are hearing me talk and then have to get feedback about that. The feedback can be hard. I actually changed my comments so the only people who follow me can comment, and that's made Instagram a much lovelier place for me. But yeah, it is a scary thing to put yourself out, especially on social media where you're opening up about something that could be painful or vulnerable, and then not being sure what's going to come back at you in that comment section, or in the comment section of really anything. So yeah, I think, but yeah, I can see that a book does in some ways feel more private because your neighbor isn't going to run across it on Facebook accidentally. Most likely, it's going to be people who are already seeking it out. So.
Exactly.
Um, okay, I'm just wondering if we should jump into a couple of these questions, and then if we want to keep chatting after, we could too. But
Lovely.
so the first one that's come in is, as an elementary educator, I used to hear, "You'll understand when you're a mom." Now I've hit 40, I hear, "You can't understand because you're not a mom." How would you address this sentiment?
Oh God, that's such a harsh one, isn't it? That's almost one of the really violently stereotypical ones that we're told to expect. I didn't get them very much, I think, because I was so politely upfront about the fact that I had tried to become a parent and couldn't, which made me a very fun dinner companion for quite a long time. Although it did actually end up opening some extremely unexpected and honest conversations with people. I think, given that I know a lot of people who have a lot of extremely, shall we say, spicy opinions, and not in the spicy novel sense, there is the only way that I found to deal with this is with lightness, curiosity, and humor, which, my God, when you're feeling under it, is extremely challenging to do. And let's be
Mhm.
frank, there are sometimes you just can't do this. When you can't understand because you're not a mom, then I think what I'm hearing there is not necessarily so much about the physical stuff. It's about the sheer ball ache of being a parent and the stuff that is involved there. I mean, even that ballerina ranch woman, the trad wife that sort of went viral recently. I mean, yeah, she's got like Instagram deals out of the wazoo and loads of followers. She's still raising what, like 10 kids on her own with
I
no
think she's got like 8
school.
kids.
Oh my God. And the husband that seems to do absolutely F all. Great. Love to see that. Not. Um, but
Don't
in
even get me
terms of,
started on Mormon culture. That I
no,
grew up
no, quite.
Mormon, so I've got
Oh,
got
okay.
some
No,
thoughts. We can't go down this rabbit
no,
hole.
no
We'll
more.
never
We've
get
done,
out of
sorry,
it.
I've rabbit holed us too much already during
No,
this
you're
talk.
good.
But oh, I mean, this is the sort of thing where I'm so tempted to actually, I periodically go through Reddit and just see some of those forums when people do have wonderful snapbacks to people saying awful things. I'm a huge fan of Am I the Asshole? And also Best of Reddit Updates is just wonderful because it tends to just be like a little museum to stupid things. But also, I think sometimes what I have found is that there are, like, generally some people who it is just not worth wasting your energy on. If
Mhm.
it, and that I don't mean that in the Michelle Obama rise above, because actually I've been so satisfied by seeing the Democrats, for example, go very low recently when it comes to Vance. Wildly satisfying. And there's a huge place for that. But I mean, in terms of looking after your heart and your energy, It may just be going, nope, you're right there, and moving on, or
Yeah.
going, oh, but something about like, you probably, I mean, the temptation just to go, well, there's probably things you can't understand because you're a fucking idiot. But again, that's the sort of
Well,
thing that I would probably have said more in my 20s, 30s, and in those early days. I think there has to be you just need to almost have like a little box of responses, and some of which you
mhm,
go, this is the thing that I will say to my grandma's friends who really only sort of are thinking the best of me, but also just have no understanding whatsoever. They don't need to
yeah.
have anything much done. And anything that you do get into the weeds of feeling or examining why people are saying, you really do with people who are genuinely in your life, not
Mhm.
necessarily people that you see lightly at work or others. But then there may also be times when it does just feel right and appropriate for you to go, oh, that's an interesting comment. Or
Mhm.
what also is quite satisfying, sorry, I've just remembered, and this is the last one, is just to go, oh, I didn't quite catch that. Sorry, could you say that again? And
Yeah.
literally make themselves repeat themselves so that they can't then go, oh, I didn't mean anything.
Yeah.
They have to then think what they've said
I like
and
that.
repeat it to you. It's a little bit like, ironically, some parents do with children or teachers do with
Mhm.
children, and make them literally hear the words that have just come out of their mouths again. And then that'll also make you feel a bit more like Bobby Big Bollocks about it as well, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I'm also seeing, and I've heard this from people who work with children in different capacities, because, Jennifer said she's an elementary educator. So I feel like there's an extra layer of having a professional degree that is you are qualified to work with children, and like you're a child's therapist or you're a teacher, and getting like, well, you couldn't understand because you're not a mom. So
More
I'm wondering,
qualified than
Jennifer,
you. Yeah.
if part of this is specifically in like work settings, like maybe you're hearing it from parent teacher conferences. Yeah, okay. That's what I was wondering, if you're getting it from like parents. And my I mean, I don't know how to like phrase this in a good way, but I mean, I wonder if it's something, if you could somehow craft a response, like kind of write it out and work it out how you want to say it, but something about that just highlights your education, like, because maybe it's about saying, no, I'm not a parent, but I do have a degree in education and was trained to work as an
Yeah.
educator. And I mean, just thinking about that, like parents don't have education degrees that teach them how to teach, right? So you do have professional experience working with children that's training that parents actually don't have. So you're not trying to parent their kids, you're their teacher. So I don't know, that sounds very rude the way I said it. I know you can't actually say it like that to parents, but I wonder if there's something in there that
Yeah.
you could kind of workshop a little bit and come up with because I agree with Kat. Like I think it's all about having some pre-prepared responses that you kind of have in your brain that are just your go-tos. That's one of the things I did really early on, is thinking about what different situations am I finding myself in that I'm really struggling to have these conversations, and what can I come up with that's like a quick reply that I've already crafted, it's in my head, and I don't have to work too hard when I get put on the spot.
Yeah.
And that might change, right? Because it's going to be might be a different response depending on if you're like talking to a salesperson at the Gap and something comes up versus you're in a professional setting versus it's your best friend. Like I think there's going to be like different ways you're going to want to respond based on the situation, but I definitely think having some pre-crafted
Yeah.
responses and kind of workshopping through some of those so that you feel more prepared um could can be helpful. But yeah,
And
that's annoying.
no, completely annoying. Sorry, Jennifer, as well. I completely missed the bit about you obviously also being a teacher. I think also just making the point, if it feels appropriate, that you work with children, raising, guiding, and teaching them for minimum 40 hours a week and have done for many years. I mean, yes, you're not a mum, but you're doing a significant amount to raise the adults of tomorrow, which is fabulous. And also, thank you very much for your work.
Yeah. Okay, so our next question was, um, how did you find your subjects, and do they include single people, either those already single or those whose relationships broke down because of infertility?
Yes and yes to the last two. I've sort of briefly addressed how to find the subjects, and I'll do that again and towards the end. So there were quite a few people in here whose relationships did break down because of infertility, as well as other issues that sort of just compounded with that. Because as we know, when you're going through a really challenging circumstance, whether at home or at work, that's going to have like an earthquake effect on other areas of your life. And those often don't exist in a vacuum. So yeah, there are stories from people there. And in also just including single people, yes. So we've got a couple of people in there who are not coupled up, if you like, and experiencing their own examination of what it means to be childless, child-free, one who'd frozen their eggs and was prepared to potentially go down the single parenting route, and then inadvertently got pregnant and had a miscarriage, and then has since decided that perhaps her life is great the way it is, and she's just going to see what happens with it. I think it's very tempting to look for stories that are all neatly wrapped up in a big bow. But the thing is because these are all like messy life stories, like my own, I've no idea what's going to happen in the next 5-10 years. I mean, it's extraordinarily unlikely that I would have a kid. I'll probably get more animals at some point, but again, who knows? Like lives are sort of rolling on, really, which is why that's sort of quite inspiring in a way to get these snapshots of where people are at the time, which is really lovely. And in terms of how I found my subjects, a lot of Google holes on social media, looking up different communities, reading, listening, watching. That sounds very creepy. I don't mean it in a creepy way. And then these public submissions as well, and recommendations from other people about just interesting people that I heard of. And also a few people introduced themselves to me when I announced that I was making the book, because we had like a few people lined up to launch the book with, if you like, but then pretty much everybody else came after that. So we were just sort of, adding to the roster as we went and seeing, again, in a very free way, what people thought that they might like to write about and what issues they might like to cover as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very cool. Okay, so we have another question. Well, Kath, first of all, thank us for talking about current political situations. So I really do feel like we could have a whole separate webinar, Kat, of just you and I shit talking for a while about politics. But she then asked, was everyone who wrote for the book already a writer of some sort, or did you encourage people to write an essay for the first time? And if so, how did you go about that?
That's such a great question. Thank you. I didn't explain this earlier. I'm really bad at explaining my own work. So this is why I
No, not
really
at all. I didn't
appreciate
really ask
thoughtful
you about the
questions. No, no,
process or
no.
anything. We kind of skipped over that. So
So again, it was really important to me from an accessibility point of view, and again from a niche point of view, if you like, that having crowdfunded this book, that we make it with people who you wouldn't necessarily see in an anthology otherwise, who would usually be people who had already written their own books, magazine articles, documentaries, all of that sort of stuff, and sort of not necessarily retreading the same ground. And that there is a huge also argument for having that. It can be familiar and essential, but it was just really important to me to give lots of different people a voice. So whilst a few people in this book are professional writers, Stella Duffy, Alice Jolly, Sophia Money Coots, which is obviously my favorite name in the world ever, and a few people who write alongside their day jobs, if you like, but it's not their main thrust. There were lots of people in it who are not professional writers and who are not writers. But I think something that, again, I've learned from support groups is that when people have the chance to write about or speak about their own experiences, if you ask somebody to speak about something that they've gone through, you will be amazed at how somebody can speak so fluently without stumbling, without umming, without ahhing for 3-4 minutes, however long it is. And similarly, in the email submissions that I got, I'd ask people to sort of outline a bit about their experience and what they might like to write about. And everybody, pretty much without exception, who submitted wrote with such fluency and such heart. And that's what you want, really. I mean, I've included, beautifully written books in the resources, like Hilary Mantel wrote an amazing memoir called Giving Up the Ghost. She couldn't have children because she had absolutely horrendous endometriosis. And Miranda Ward, again, one of the contributors to the book, is a beautiful writer anyway, and writes in a very delicate, gorgeous way, and Laura Barton too. But it's that thing when somebody is writing about what they've been through, their voice shines through, and that's what I want. I don't want everybody to write like, I don't know, me or Jilly Cooper or that person over there, or who's that? I can't see the surname. Susanna Clarke, for example, who wrote Mr. Strange and Jonathan Norrell. I want everybody to sound like themselves, because that's the whole point of being able to share our experiences, and for people to find, if not necessarily comfort, then a feeling of having somebody sitting alongside themselves whilst they're going through their own experience. Because if we don't feel comfortable for whatever reason, and there were lots of people I didn't feel comfortable with in talking through the horrible, violent, jagged, and very unpredictable feelings that we're going through, then sometimes you just need people to hold your hands, who are in a book or in a podcast or somewhere else, and who will just sit and hold space for you that way.
Yeah. Okay, I've got 2 more questions for you. I'm like, could talk to you literally all day. And I'm like, are we losing people? But no, we haven't lost, like, we still have the same amount of participants that we started with. So people are hanging in there. And yeah, this is just, man, Kat, I wish I could talk to you all day. I love this. Okay, so my next question for you is, the book obviously covers a lot of stuff that we are told that we're not supposed to talk about, even though a lot of them are common. So, like, specifically with the infertility, like 1 in 6 people experience infertility, and 1 in 5 never have children. 1 in 4 pregnancies end in miscarriage. So, I mean, these things are like actually pretty common, right? But we're still told we're not supposed to talk about it. So why is it so hard to talk about this stuff?
Because people don't like anything that is not nice or polite, and particularly when it comes to women or anybody who is sort of like loosely covered by that term. In the UK, particularly, there is that sort of thing that it's been encouraged for people not to talk about being pregnant until they are sort of 12 weeks pregnant or so, and therefore in the safe zone. But unfortunately, as we now know through more and more people sharing their experience and their feelings and awful things that they've gone through, that's no guarantee to completion, safety, any of that sort of stuff at all. But so often it is boringly another method of control, whether that is a habitual thing from generations that came before us about how they were raised, or about society more generally. But I have found it quite thrilling and quite a relief to have built up a community both in real life. Sorry, that sounds like I've got a swimming pool full of people to go and meet. That's not it at all. But just like, random pals that I've made who live on my street, or the woman around the corner who quite literally runs the spa, people who chat and who you just vibe with, and you can have these really challenging conversations with, because my God, it's exhausting enough living without having to have every single big conversation be with somebody on Instagram, on social media, or on a big platform or something. But I do think that as all of this has been covered more in TV, in the popular culture that we consume, that ultimately is how societal attitudes change, through seeing people who have had similar experiences. Or I mean, that's really a big part of how attitudes towards gay people shifted, particularly in the UK, was just by seeing more gay people in music and TV and film and feeling like they knew them a bit more, even though obviously they didn't at all. And then that in turn led to family members eventually, feeling more comfortable and again to Section 28, thank goodness, being gotten rid of.
Yeah.
So it is through just more representation and also just people having it sort of dropped in quite softly, quite loosely. I mean, I don't mean to give the impression that I go around going, I'm Cat Brown, I'm infertile every 2 minutes. But if it is relevant to a piece that I'm writing, an opinion piece, not like a review about a TV program or something, I'll be doing something about Strictly Come Dancing in a few weeks, which is the UK's Dancing with the Stars. I don't think it'll come into conversation then, but who can say? But it just means that then if I am relaxed-ish and oh well, that's actually relevant to me, then somebody else might go, oh okay, oh either I didn't know about that, or that reminds me about my auntie, my cousin, my friend, my sister, my daughter, that sort of thing. And that's
Yeah.
how those barriers come down. It's like a classic example, I think, from a certain generation in the UK is, oh, but I don't mean Dennis. Dennis is lovely, whatever we're talking about, like being gay or anything, because that's an example that person knows. And
Right.
so it's really about just we lower these barriers by building up relationships either in real life or with people in the culture that we consume, which is really, really important.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I like that you kind of mentioned both of those levels because I think there's a societal discourse that we see happening and how is that what conversations are happening there that give like wide representation, like what kind of stories are we hearing, what's being talked about. And then there is that individual level. And I feel like you see this a lot where you'll have like a politician who passes a lot of like uh, anti-LGBTQ legislation, and then they have a kid come out, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, I'm changing my stance on this. And it's like, okay, I guess it took you like knowing someone
Yeah,
to care. Okay. But I do think that because I think so many of us don't talk about our stories, even with the people closest to us, sometimes it doesn't give that um, opportunity for representation. Sometimes even with other people who are childless, I'll say like, think through your network, think about your aunts and uncles, think about the people that you went to school with, that you work with, that you go to church with, whatever it is, like the people who are around you. And I bet you can actually think of quite a few people that you know who don't have kids. Now their circumstance, they may be child free by choice or childless not by choice, but um sometimes when I'll say that, people say, oh, you know what? Actually, I do have an aunt who doesn't have kids, and I don't know what her story is because no one's ever talked about it. And that curiosity of like, oh, actually, maybe I do have people in my network who are also either childless not by choice or who are child free that I think there's so much we can learn and connect with the child free by choice community too. There's a lot of the experiences that we share with them too. Um, but it takes that like opening up and being vulnerable to then make those connections. And so it's just interesting because I think we feel so siloed and isolated, but we're not. It's just that we're not making those connections because we're not finding each other because we're not talking about it.
exactly. And it is just, again, it's not to say that you go around chatting about it willy-nilly with absolutely everybody, because that's not practical. It's not safe in some cases. But I
Mm-hmm.
think what is really interesting is seeing people really wanting to go into the nuance of what it means not to have children. So obviously
Yeah.
there'll be a layer for being child free, which is very different to being childless. I mean, you may
Mm-hmm.
eventually get to a point where you feel child free, and that's really lovely. But there may also be a point where you feel like, oh, but people are talking about childless people as being selfish, and I don't recognize or identify with that. And actually, excuse me, I tried X, Y, or Z. I dated some absolute lunatics for a long time, and I just didn't, all of that sort of thing. And then there might be another tranche that is like, well, actually, I don't want to be pitied as like, oh, poor person over there, as again Alice mentions in that opening essay, of awful things happening to. And I don't want you to go around imagining that because I am childless, I walk around 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, feeling completely rotten.
Mhm.
And actually, on that note, arguably, I would say that's also not at all the case for me now, any more than walking around with my hip replacement. I feel pain all the time. There will always be jolts and there will be
Yeah.
random bits coming in, like we've discussed. But again, it's not like I walk around and my one and only archetype is childless woman, oh, boo-hoo, blah, 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 or evolving into crone. Although I do kind of love Jodie Day again reclaiming
Mhm.
crone, which again, huge archetype for womanhood.
Yeah. Well, I think
Um,
it just shows too what a huge connection, like like people don't know what to do with us when we don't have kids. They're trying to figure out what box to put us in, and it's yeah, it's interesting because I've heard people who are child free by choice say that they will tell people that they're childless not by choice sometimes because they don't want to deal with the comments about, oh, you're so selfish, or like the kind of bingos that people get if you're child free by choice are very different than if you say you're childless. Because if you say you're childless not by choice, you get the pity. If you say you're
mhm.
child free, you're gonna get the selfish and like the kind of negative connotations that way. So it's just interesting because people who I know who are child free will say, tell people I'm childless so that I can avoid the you're so selfish. And then people who are childless, I've heard say, I tell people I'm child free by choice, so I don't have to get the pity.
Yeah.
Um,
But
it's
again,
we can't.
like we were saying to Jennifer, it's about giving different answers depending on who you're with, how many spoons of energy you have that day, all that sort of thing. Um,
Mhm.
and again, it's something that really just pertains so much to women and how women's roles in society have been prescribed. Because again, I loved whoever it was who first made the observation that, we've never had a president before who's given birth. There's literally
Yeah.
nothing strange about Kamala Harris in that respect, or indeed at
Right.
all, mercifully. Um, but yeah, it's just so interesting. It's so interesting being at the very sort of forefront of how societal attitudes are evolving. And it's difficult because they haven't fully improved yet, which means that
Yeah.
we're still living through times of change. But I mean, earlier, I can't even remember how it ended up. My husband and I were sitting in the pub having a incredibly poorly timed for August roast lunch, which is more normally a sort of wintry British food. And we ended up looking up the humours, which was basically how moods and characteristics and some health aspects were dealt with for quite a long time during history before they discovered psychology, psychiatry, and how our insides work. And I just had this moment of thinking, oh my God, me looking at this Wikipedia page going, oh my goodness, how primitive and yet how charming. That's going to be people looking back at us in 2024 in 200 years, maybe not going how charming, but certainly going, oh, they knew nothing about, fertility, infertility, about people's roles, about identifying with each other. And I think that again that can be quite freeing in a way to know that what we're doing now in our activism and our conversations, literally conversations within family, within friendship groups, that's doing a huge amount to sort of to change people's viewpoints or just to give them some more information that helps them to adjust their own understanding or viewpoint.
Mhm. And I think it's really hard to do that when you're in the deepest grief phase of this because it's so raw and those interactions can be so challenging. But I do think that, if you're someone who has gotten into a place where you're not in that heavy grief as much anymore, starting to find ways that you can start having these conversations with people, and starting out small, it really can. I think that's going to be what makes a difference in starting to kind of change people's perceptions. Um, and that actually leads me into my next question for you, Kat. So, in your book introduction, you said there is common ground to be had when someone tells their story honestly, even more so when it's something that has been kept in the shadows. Emerge from them. You are seen, you are heard, and you are real. I love that so much. And I'm just wondering, because there are a lot of challenges to talking about our experiences, and even if it's just with someone close to us, right? Like not even publicly, but just sharing with anyone can be really challenging. So I'd like to just hear if you have any advice for how people could start to kind of gently like find ways to start sharing their story a bit or finding places to talk about it. And I pulled this up from the Childless Collective online community because yesterday I did a poll and asked people, um, uh, have you talked about your experience of being childless much or do you keep it close to the chest? And it looks like we had about like 75 people who answered, and 16% selected the option of I've only shared in online groups or with a therapist, so not talked to anyone in person about it. 50% said that they talked about it with a few people that were close to them. 22% said that they've talked about it with most of their friends and family, and then 10% said that they'll talk about it with most people. So kind of interesting, I thought, to just kind of see where that group was at in terms of um, how they're talking about it or who they're sharing with. But yeah, I would just love to get your thoughts on it. Is challenging, it's scary. We often get bingos back of just people not responding how we want, and sometimes responding really in awful ways or insensitive ways. So just curious, yeah, what's your advice for someone who maybe isn't talking about it, but feels like they would like to because it would feel good for them to have someone to share it with?
I think, first of all, it's appreciating that this isn't something that you have to do. You don't have to share anything that you don't feel comfortable and safe to do so. That's a real, just because social media exists, just because podcast, broadcast, online, everything exists, you absolutely in no way need to partake in this. And that's completely fine. That said, I do think it's really important to find a way to say these things out loud. And I don't necessarily, in fact, I don't mean in writing or texting or that sort of thing. I mean in physically talking about your experience. There is something bizarrely healing in a way that I don't quite understand about having your story heard.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't have to be heard by a therapist, because often that's, depending on who your therapist is, that can be a slightly transactional relationship, which is fine. And it's almost as though you're saying it to the walls and you're not quite sure if it's being taken in. Something that I have really found incredibly helpful is to create a sense of ritual about this. And I don't mean going full The Craft, although a legendary film of the 90s, but I mean sometimes finding somewhere really beautiful. For example, if you're near a wood or trees or the sea or just somewhere that is reasonably secluded, where there aren't people around you that are going to make you feel self-conscious, and just find an aspect to fixate on, whether it is a beautiful shell or a bird or some point on the horizon where you can tell your story and speak your experience into the world. Because I think when we are going through anything that is really bloody hard, which all of this is, by the way, like we're all very jolly about it, but that comes as the flip side of something that is incredibly traumatic, really isolating, and requires a lot of inner and outer work. But we can feel as though we are completely removed from what's going on in the world. And being reminded by speaking this out loud that we are another jigsaw piece in the world that is happening, and also just that the same thing is going to be happening at this exact moment to a network of other men and women and people around the world. Just remembering that even though we can't see or speak to them, that we are speaking that energy out there. We just need to get rid of it where it just everything sort of feels lodged in here. Which is again why in yoga classes people do a lot about like big strong breaths out to try and get that. If you've never managed to sort of figure out a way of doing that, then just talking that experience out there as well is really big.
Yeah.
But also I think it can sometimes feel really almost too much to have to find a person to share this with, which is why sometimes I think the best conversations that we ever have are ones that happen completely by accident
Yeah.
and just happen by two people talking about something that may not seem to be at all connected to what we, want to or have to talk about, but just that sort of comes on to there. And there's obviously a big difference between trauma dumping and just having a conversation with somebody. We've probably all experienced the former to a certain extent with somebody who hasn't quite understood those boundaries.
Yeah.
But just being able to, I think part of life, part of being a human is being able to show that light and shade with each other and to be able to honor what's going on with other people, and just gently, I suppose, like a tree shedding its leaves, if you like, just be able
Yeah.
to say that. Like this year, I've been saying a lot, I feel very sad. I feel very sad. And ironically, the more times that I've said, I feel very sad, the lighter I've ended up feeling.
Mhm. Oh, I love those suggestions. If I may, I'll add too that I think for me it was helpful before I started really talking about it to hear other people talk about it, to hear other people share their stories. It kind of helped me to, I don't know, make sense of some of the language and feel more prepared to kind of articulate my own story too, I think. So, there are, finding like podcasts um, and articles and Instagram accounts of places where you can go where you can hear people sharing their stories, I think can be really helpful as like a first step. And then, of course, I think the Childless Collective is a place where people can also come. It's ID checked. We're very, you talked about gatekeeping earlier. I do feel like we have a bit of that in the community because we do ask people who are still trying to become a parent not to join. So it is a very specific group, but we did that intentionally to try to make it for a specific person who is childless not by choice and no longer trying. And I would really invite anyone who is wanting to make some connections and maybe find some ways to start talking about it too, to check out the Childless Collective and see if it feels like a fit. Even I think joining some of the calls, even if you just join and listen in, or if at some point you want to share a little bit about how you're feeling or something that's coming up, I think that sometimes can be a nice place to dip your toe in the water because you're with other people with that lived experience of being childless. And so you won't get as many of the bingos back, hopefully. And so, that would be my recommendation too, is to maybe start with other people who are childless and in sharing. So, all right. So Kat's book, no one talks about this stuff. Fantastic. I want to see if I have your other, hold on. I think I have your other book, maybe.
Also, everybody in the chat, I'm so sorry. I'm such an imbecile. I've just realized that I have been replying and sending off recommendations and stuff in the chat. I've been sending them to the host and panelists only. So none of you will have seen
Oh,
that. I didn't realize it was set to that. So really, really sorry. I am a grown-up adult. I am usually vaguely capable. I clearly haven't been
no,
at
it
all.
happens a
Sorry, gang.
lot.
Yeah.
Maybe I can go through the chat and pull these out and share them in an email afterwards.
That would be so kind. It's basically just some podcasts, some books, and
Yeah,
some Instagram accounts, but this is great. And thank
I
you,
have your
everybody.
other book here. It was in one of my moving boxes, but it wasn't sealed up yet. So, this is Kat's second book about ADHD. I have not read this to be honest yet, but I am looking forward to it because, like I said, I got diagnosed 2 years ago, and it has been one of those things where it started like a brand new journey of self-discovery because now all of a sudden it's like someone gives you, it's like you've had like blurry vision, and then someone gives you some glasses and you're like, oh, everything all of a sudden looks different because now I have a sharper understanding of what's going on. And then all of a sudden I have to look back at my whole life and be like, oh, so many things make sense that didn't make sense before. And so it's like this whole process of a journey of self-discovery again and having to understand myself through my ADHD. And it's been huge and hard and relieving and all kinds of emotions coming up. So anyway, I can't wait to read your book. It's Not a Bloody Trend, Understanding Life as an ADHD Adult. So if you have ADHD or you suspect you do, check this out. And then No One Talks About This Stuff, the book we were talking about today. So Kat, thank you so much. If you want to follow Kat, she's on X and Instagram under Kat Brown Writes. And of course, you can go to her website. Is that also Kat Brown Writes?
Yeah. Instagram's got plenty of pictures of cats and dogs on it, if that ever floats your boat.
Perfect. And what else?
Yeah.
What did I miss? What are you working on? What do you want people to know about? How can people connect with you?
No, I'm really grateful to have this chance to chat to you again, Katie, because I love you and just think you're absolutely amazing. And also to have so many wonderful, thoughtful and intelligent questions and comments from people in the chat is really wonderful, because again, for me, connecting with people who also have this experience alongside all the other intersectional stuff that's going on in our lives, it reminds me that it's not just me going through it, and there's a lot of it is just me that I felt over the last few years. So thank you so much for reminding me that it's not just me at all.
It's definitely not just you. And I mean, your book already does a beautiful job of letting people know that they're not alone. So yeah, definitely check out the book. Kat, I literally could talk to you for like 8 hours straight and not be sick of it. So I thank you for being so generous with your
That's
time. I
fine.
know we went way
My dog
over
has
what we
literally
thought.
fallen asleep, so
Oh,
I'll go and wake her up for her dinner.
well, yeah, thank you so much. This was incredible, and I hope to get to talk to you soon. Maybe we can even do another webinar at some point and with a different focus. But it's just been so great to talk with you, and thank you for being generous with your time today, but also just the awareness that you are raising through your book, through your journalism about infertility, about childlessness, about ADHD, and all the other amazing things that you're doing. I am just so impressed by you and how much you do. I literally don't know how you are doing all that you do. Like, how did you get 2 books out in the same year? I am totally confused and baffled by it, but you're
Fucking nervous
incredible.
breakdown, babe. Honestly, it's fine. That was just bad timing. But no, Katie, thank you so much, and thank you for everything that you do, and thank you everybody as well. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
All right, thank you. Thank you
Lots
everyone
of
who
love.
joined. It's good to have you
Bye.
here. Bye.